Today is April 15th, 2014, and this is episode 101. This program is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Cryptocurrency is a new field of study. Consult your local futurist, lawyer, and investment advisor before making any decisions whatsoever for yourself. Welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the digital economy and the future of money. My name is Adam B. Levine, and today we're going to try something a little different. Andreas Antonopoulos is joined by Chris Ellis in LTB 101 for today's discussion on Bitcoin philosophy. While you don't have to take notes, there will be a quiz. Enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Andreas Antonopoulos of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Today I have Chris Ellis of Feathercoin on the show, and we'll be talking about Bitcoin and philosophy. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks very much for having me.
I really enjoyed our discussion the other day, and I wanted to expand a bit on it because, as you know, part of my heritage is Greek, and that doesn't give me any particular insight into Greek philosophy, but I certainly understand some of the motivations behind the Greek philosophy because it's still embedded in our Greek culture. I really enjoyed hearing you talk about philosophy, and I think we share a common understanding of the need for forming a narrative and creating the right circumstances around Bitcoin. But before we get to that, let's take a step back. Why philosophy and Bitcoin?
Well, there is no understanding Bitcoin without the philosophy. And so we should probably start off with why philosophy, right? And this is the question a lot of people get. But philosophy is, and I might get into a lot of trouble for saying this because anyone who tries to define it usually does, but it's the what is question. It questions previous assumptions and things that we thought we knew to be true. And it's actually more a way of being. It gives us a way of dealing with the unknown and the unknowable. Because what it does is builds a self-knowledge. How do I understand myself in relation to the environment? Because if I understand myself, then it really doesn't matter where I am or when I am. Then I will have the framework I need and a template and a set of tools with critical thinking and so on about how to deal with it and how I can learn. Because if I don't know anything about my environment and I don't know anything about myself, that's usually not good news.
So it's about learning more so than it is about having knowledge. It's about the process of acquiring knowledge and relating to the environment, right?
You've got it. And if we want to be very particular, we could say it's about taking data, turning into information, turning information into knowledge, and then turning that knowledge into self-knowledge, wisdom. Philo, love, and Sophia, wisdom. And so you have the love of wisdom. It's a movement. It's a moving. Saying that you're going to philosopher, I make no claims to being a philosopher. I'm very insecure about my knowledge. I describe myself as a thinker. I like talking to people about difficult issues, about hard issues, about issues they probably only think about when they're, on a train and looking out the window, but not the kinds of things they would ever think about at work. And thinking about things with no expectation of return. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to get out of this because ultimately thinking results in failure. The risk you're taking with philosophy is you don't know what it's going to produce. You don't know what the outcome's going to be. Sometimes the thought will just stop very abruptly and it will make you feel very silly, particularly if you're giving a voice to it to other people. Sometimes it will just keep going on and on and on. The thought will just take you to all kinds of places and you'll run out of energy.
Thinking itself is modeling the world. And in doing so, you're taking something that has infinite complexity and infinite depth and trying to map it into a finite model that can fit inside your head and thinking patterns. So by its very definition, this is a lossy process. And when you take, say, 3 dimensions and you map them to 2, you lose something in the process. So by the very definition, if you try to create an abstract model of the world, you have to remove most of it in order to understand it, even a tiny bit. I find it funny that you say you're insecure about calling yourself a philosopher because that's actually very characteristic of people who are thinkers, is that they're unsure. Certainty comes mostly from ignorance, I would say, rather than from knowledge. Knowledge makes you extremely insecure because the more you learn, the more you know you don't know.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. It's actually quite like being an athlete in a way. It's like saying you're going to do athletics, education of the body. That's how I'm understanding it. And it's like, well, what kind of athlete? You know, you could be a runner, you could be a rower, you could be a swimmer. You can get your philosophy from literature, from art, from film. I mean, pretty much anywhere. You can get it from idle talk, you know, just everyday sort of water cooler type conversations. The problem is it's kind of impoverished when you take it down to the level of what Heidegger will call, you know, the inauthentic mode. This is existentialism. You know, you're just kind of going around your life. You're not really thinking about what you're doing. You're just kind of getting on with the day to day. It's all about what they say. What did they say on the news? And you reduce everything to this kind of, you know, just average everydayness. And you still get that little voice in your head that says, you're wasting your life. You're wasting your life, you know, and it's there and it's calling you. But you're just completely blind to it. And you just get washed away by the general consensus, by just the general will, as Rousseau called it. And also, I feel it's apt to sort of say, because I haven't said this before in any of the times where we've met on the Bitcoin group and stuff, I am heavily influenced by people like Robert Harrison at KZSU, Stanford professor, hugely influential, Corey Anton, and the guys at Partially Examined Life as well. So when I talk, I just want to put that in there so that anyone listening to me, if they want to learn more, they want to see where my thoughts have come from, those three places in particular have been very, very influential on me.
There's something about being able to go out there and talk with people about things that really matter and have meaningful conversations that I find tremendously rewarding. And I think that's where knowledge comes from. It comes from testing your assumptions and asking tough questions and being asked tough questions. I find one of the most rewarding parts of my job in Bitcoin is the ability to meet with members of the community on a very regular basis and get essentially a free ride along with their community and learn from what they're doing in Bitcoin. And through that process, I can develop all of the ideas that I then take public and talk about in the various shows I do. But really, it's not about me coming up in ideas alone in a room. It's about having conversations every single day. And these conversations yank me out of any possibility of getting lost in the mundane, because my thinking is challenged every single day that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what I say to people is, you know, if you're smarter than most of your friends, you've got the wrong friends, and you need to move into new circles and people who can test you, not test you so much that you end up feeling terrible about yourself. You know, I'm not saying you should go join CERN or something if you're not good enough at the physics, but you should definitely subject yourself to critical thinkers who can challenge you in new ways.
There's a whole world out there, and it's full of conventional wisdom, and it's full of ideas that we take for granted. And if you peek just below the surface, most of the most commonly held beliefs in our world are fundamentally untrue. That's what really fascinates me, is that the things that the vast majority of people believe in are probably the least true things out there.
Well, that's because, you know, we only get to truth through time. And so, for example, let's take notion of a king and a sovereign, right? A king actually at the beginning of the reign is a rebel. He starts life as a usurper, but ends life as a kind of overweight beast, kind of, you know, luxuriating in all his glory, that the throne gets too comfortable and he doesn't want to lose his power anymore. And so then you need to have a new king. Now, from our perspective, looking back, it looks like a king is just incumbent. It looks like, well, this is normal. And why challenge it? But now we're starting to see with the introduction of coin, I don't know about you. Or I do actually. I think I heard you say you when you first read the paper, you couldn't eat, you couldn't sleep. Had exactly the same reaction. I mean, I still don't eat. I still only eat once or twice a day because eating interrupts my thinking. And so I want to keep thinking. So I don't eat. I just drink coffee and just read and read and read. And this whole community really is divisive, the Bitcoin community, okay? Because it divides the curious from the incurious. There are people that are turning around and learning about this interesting new phenomena. Then there are people that are just staring at two-dimensional shadows on the wall, claiming knowledge about the three-dimensional objects they're meant to represent. And you can't understand the complexity and the richness, as you alluded to earlier, of a three-dimensional object by staring at price, for example. That's the common one. And it's not to say that the price doesn't matter. It's still an aspect. It's just not the most important one. And it falls into a myriad, and it makes up just one part of a very complex picture. And so I quite like it that it's the whole community kind of brings me together with people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. You know, had Bitcoin not existed, I wouldn't have met all these great people that I come across. I mean, obviously you and this show has been great because, you know, I regularly go and contact the people that have appeared on the show or look into their work. We met somebody the other day at CoinFest in Vancouver, Crypto Youth. Nathan and Karina have started up this amazing project to take the proceeds of Bitcoin mining and various cryptocurrency mining and give it to children that are disadvantaged, children at risk, to help pay for scholarships. And this is fantastic. So when, you know, these self-proclaimed experts talk about the bubble, I think, okay, but all I've listened to is a bunch of non sequiturs. It's not that you're wrong. It's just that you're missing the point. You're not right either. And what you're doing is you're approaching this new object and you're just saying, well, I already know what it is. And I expect it to come ready-made as well. That's the other thing. There's a real kind of laziness to the thinking. Like, it should just have everything built in straight away for me, ready to go. But then other people are more generative. They come to it and they say, well, isn't that interesting? And I wonder what I can learn about this, or I wonder what the possibilities are for this. What could this do for people? What do you mean I can transmit economic value at the world at a distance, at near instantaneous speed and at no cost? It just mind boggles, but at least it helps us to identify the good from the bad, because that's what money is. Money brings together the honest, the dishonest, the criminals and the police. It brings together everybody in a place, and you don't leave until you know why. And I think the people that are approaching this new way of being, I would say it's a new way of acting, because it's not just about the money. It's also about the work, which we should investigate a little bit. And if you think, when people say intrinsic value, they're really saying, I don't find what supports commodity to be valuable to me. It's not important to me. That's a better way of saying it. It's not important to me.
Well, it's fundamentally misunderstanding the thing for the symbol, which is an ancient philosophical question. Intrinsic value assumes that there is a thing behind the symbol, and money in itself is really not just a symbol. It's a language for communicating value between people. Money is not just symbolic in the very basic sense. It's a full symbology of value, and it's used to communicate value in an abstract language for which there is no thing behind it. And that effort to find the intrinsic value is almost like the effort to find the Platonic ideal shape that exists to give the abstraction reality, right? That somehow the abstraction only works if there is something behind it to give it value. And we know that that's not the case. We know through repeated application and through history that the symbols and languages emerge, and they serve purposes regardless of intrinsic value. Intrinsic value in itself is almost an oxymoron, because value is an assigned abstraction and therefore cannot be intrinsic. Value is assigned on a context-by-context basis, on a moment-by-moment basis. Here in the US, we take even simple things that should have intrinsic value. Water, which is life-giving. And you live in a society where water is mostly abundant, and you put it in a fountain and you throw money in it. There was a cartoon I saw on Reddit. On Twitter, somebody tweeted this photo of an African child looking up at the Western journalist, and the caption was, "So what you're trying to tell me is that you pee in a bowl of clean water," and that's unthinkable, because there is no clean water. in many places in the world. But, what is the intrinsic value of water? The intrinsic value of water is infinite when you're thirsty, and almost zero when you're not, when it's abundant, which means it's not intrinsic. It's something that's assigned to us purely based on the context, based on how scarce it is, based on our needs, based on our environment, based on our future expectations of its availability. I got into deep trouble over saying that even money, even food and water doesn't have intrinsic value if it is abundant. If it is abundant, and that's the key phrase, of course, there. And even that, because, probably that has the most intrinsic value because it is life-sustaining. And even that has very little intrinsic value. Not zero, but almost no value when it's abundant. So all of these concepts of intrinsic value represent a fundamental misunderstanding of money. And that's what I find fascinating, is that when you talk to people about Bitcoin, you quickly realize that, at least like me, they really didn't understand money until they started asking the tough questions. One of the things that Bitcoin is doing is it's starting, or cryptocurrencies in general, is starting a conversation about what is money and forcing us to skip the easy questions, or rather skip the easy answers. It forces us to skip the easy answers because it violates the easy answers. And so we find that the easy answers themselves were just a mirage. So what is money? Something that has intrinsic value? Well, not really. And something that can be used to exchange value? Not always. All of the easy answers kind of go out the window, and then you're forced to confront the fact that money is in fact a cultural phenomenon, a language, an abstraction that's much, much more complex than we realize. It's not just pieces of green fabric with lots of germs on them that people exchange as if they mean something.
Well, the intrinsic value is there, but it's there because everyone agrees it's there. It's a consensus. So it is. You're absolutely right. Everything you say is absolutely right. I think what people are longing for is a permanent store of value. And the problem is that time is always going to humiliate us. It's always going to come up with something new, something unanticipatable. And it's going to show us as fools. It's going to say, this was never valuable. Did you not realize? So I think we're the ones putting the value in there, are we not?
Yes. If anything, the one true thing in the universe is entropy. A permanent store of value would be a non-entropic object, an object that is not affected by entropy, that lives outside of space-time, an object that cannot be corrupted, a Platonic ideal. I mean, that's really what we're looking at. Again, it's this idea that if only you had this perfect object that was incorruptible, that was never depleting, that was always useful, and in a way that never changed in its usefulness, then that would have intrinsic value. But that assumes a world that doesn't exist, a world that doesn't have change. And change is the only thing that exists. And it exists.
That's right. Change, and also the rate of change. I mean, one of the things that's different now, any other point of history, is that we have such a big picture. We can see further back into time and space. We have this, what sociologists call this ambient sociality, where the whole world is just distanced to me. Like I am so close and yet so far away from a lot of people in the world. And what it does is it makes us responsible. It makes us responsible because now we have the ability to respond. I can now do something to help that person that was a victim of that tsunami. And there's no excuse. I'm running out of excuses, even to myself, even if there's nobody there to witness me watching the story unfold on the news, which I'm getting in real time from many angles. And I'm having all kinds of experts on meteorology tell me all about these kinds of weather patterns and the impact that they can have. And even if there's nobody there to see, I'm still ashamed if I don't send the money. I'm still I've got a miniature version of society in my head that says, but do this. Do you really need that money? And I think what's happening to a lot of people at the moment is, demand for money is sky high right now because people, I think of another way of thinking about money is as a sort of a liquid or a sort of kind of water. It can kind of move, but it can also freeze. And people, I think that just want money for the sake of wanting money are just waiting to be born. It's the sum total mass of all of your prior economic energy comes together and manifests as one block, one sort of entity in your world that you can then distribute. The word currency, I think John Locke applied it as he applied it, was currents. So it means not just to flow, but it also means extend the present. Money also gives you an extension. Rather than just hankering after more and more and more of it, you should actually think more about what you do with it now. What is your net present value? And we've said this before when we've spoken, and maybe we should say it again, that the reason we got into this financial mess in the first place is because the people got lazy and they outsourced wealth management to a bunch of people who then ended up forming an industry that had huge net present value. They had the money now. And that's all that really mattered. And so they went off, they formed gambling addictions. They started, betting, taking all these crazy bets. And meanwhile, people let them. And we see the numbers on the screen. This time, those shadows don't really represent what's behind there because they're just pixels. They tell you have £8,000 in your bank, but do you? Well, no, because if everybody turned up tomorrow and tried to claim it, that money wouldn't be there.
This is Chris Joseph bringing you news on Next, the first true second-generation cryptocurrency for April 16th, 2014. Several new code features have been included in the newest version of the Next testnet software. These include the Next Digital Goods Store, which is a decentralized market for the sale of digital files, and effective leasing, a form of pool where you lease the mining power of your stake without actually sending anyone your coins. These features are as yet untested and still need APIs written, so if they sound exciting to you and you're a Java coding wizard, we could use you. The new software also includes code for canonical signatures, a method for eliminating the transaction malleability problem, which was pitched by community members as designed through forum discussions. For more general information on Next or to get involved, head to nextforum.org and check out the Next newsletter on nxter.org. And of course, stay tuned for more news on Next on the next Let's Talk Bitcoin broadcast.
Money as a language is really about time-shifting value and resources. It allows you to bring value from the future into the present and to take value from the past and extend it into the future. And so it really is a temporal conversation, a time-shifting of value and resources. But it also allows us to do space shifting. Now, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies allow us to do both with much greater liquidity and velocity than ever before. And that in itself challenges the assumptions. So if you think about it, we're used to money being liquid, but we're also used to money having a certain amount of viscosity. In fact, we depend on its viscosity in order to make sense of our world. If money is in fact instantly transferable anywhere in the world, that violates a lot of the safety guards, if you want, or it violates a lot of the assumptions we have about how money works, because zero friction money doesn't make sense to us. We're used to money that has viscosity and friction built in. And in fact, we depend on that viscosity to achieve certain results, to achieve certain goals. So the viscosity itself becomes part of the operating process of money, and it provides us security by delaying the time distribution of money. You can stop a check for 5 days because of viscosity, and that allows you to take more risk in the present with that check than you would otherwise, because the viscosity of the money allows you to have a second chance.
That's interesting, because now I'm thinking of latency, and now I'm thinking there are different kinds of the viscosity issue. That's a great word to use. Okay. So there is sometimes this human imposed viscosity, right? I might choose to save money. In fact, I am a bit of a hoarder, if truth be known. It's because I want freedom. I want the freedom to think, and I can't think if I'm worried about things. So I save my money because I need a safety net, a comfort zone where I feel that I can exist and be who I am. That also has hindered me a lot. Like, I don't have a car. I live actually a very austere existence, but I like this way because now I get to just as much as I can. Whereas for somebody else, that may be completely different. So is there anything interesting to say about the human imposed latency and then the inefficiencies in, for example, the banking network, where a check gets held up, for example? Because there's also this phenomenon of check-writing, this phenomena in finance where, so they take the money, yes. And then they hold your check for 3 days, and then they go and gambling on the Forex, the largest trading market in the world.
That's part of the thing. It's really about turning bugs into features. And you see this happen again and again. The idea that you take something that is a delay imposed by the medium, by the viscosity of the system, and then you use that as a feature, as a security control. You try to exploit the viscosity to use it to protect yourself against sudden and unanticipated moves. And then you essentially outsource your security to the viscosity, and that makes the viscosity greater. It also allows people to take advantage of differences in the flow of money or in the viscosity of money in the form of arbitrage. I'll give you another example. In the last decade, we've seen an explosion in supply chain integration. Supply chain integration, meaning that in the past, if you wanted to order 10,000 jet fan widgets from Boeing, you would have to do months of negotiating and contracts and things like that. And today, in many systems, these are completely integrated based on enterprise resource planning, ERP systems, whereby you can put in a purchase order and you can ask for 1,000 jet fan widgets. And literally within maybe 10 or 15 minutes, boxes of jet fan widgets are getting loaded onto a truck somewhere in a warehouse and getting shipped to you. And in the past, this process, by taking months, could be controlled. So the viscosity of that process actually gave some advantages. It gave you opportunities for operational security. 3 or 4 people had to touch it. Each of those people could interject their own judgment. They could notice that something was wrong. They could put a hold on it. They could delay it. They could reverse it. So we took advantage of the viscosity to introduce these controls. Now there are no controls. So now imagine that you are, for example, running a system that's not properly secured, and a hacker gets in and they start ordering 100,000 widgets from every single one of your suppliers. Now, 15 minutes later, trucks are rolling. It doesn't matter if you intended these orders or not. All that matters is whether you had the credit to support them. It doesn't matter that if these actually do arrive at your factory, you can't do anything with them and you're going to make a substantial loss because 10 minutes after this order went through, or someone mistyped, and instead of 1,000 widgets, they ordered 1,000,000 widgets because they didn't realize that the unit number was a pallet of 1,000, not a single unit. And so suddenly you've got 1,000,000 widgets. But 10 minutes later, these are rolling in a truck. There goes the viscosity as a feature. And because we've worked on it as a bug and taken it out of the system, automated everything. And now we have to reintroduce controls. We have to put separation of duties and multiple authorizations and human authorizations, but also automatic systems like algorithms that check and see, is this an order of magnitude greater than any order you've ever placed before? Maybe pop up a warning and say, are you sure you want 1,000,000 widgets? Because you've never ordered 1,000,000 widgets before. Right. So we've gone from bug to feature to bug again. And with money, it's the same thing. Viscosity of money was a bug. We made it faster and faster and faster. But at the same time, people come to rely on the viscosity as a security mechanism, are afraid of losing that and the multiple layers of recourse that offers, and have not yet developed new mechanisms like, for example, in cryptocurrencies, multi-signature pick your own counterparty for escrow and validation. New ways of doing it that do not require viscosity, that can operate at that speed, but are just as secure, even more secure. And so we're kind of in limbo at the moment. We've taken away the viscosity, but we haven't actually yet built some of the mechanisms to protect people from.
Well, we have to codify it. We have to ask the what is it question. And we have to say, right, what does it mean, transmit value across the world? So one of the things that you've drawn our attention to is my ability to execute at range, my ability to execute my intentions at range. So in the old days, if I wanted to move something, I physically had to be near to it. I had to be sufficiently strong enough, or I had to be able to collaborate with others such that we could move it together. Now, if I want to move some copper from Ghana and some plastic from Taiwan to China, the flight here to London, all I have to do is buy an iPhone with one click on Amazon. And suddenly I've set about a chain reaction. And of course, it's not just me, because that infrastructure wouldn't have existed if I didn't have a shared interest. Maybe we should talk about mimesis as well, mimetics, that I want something because you want something. That then manifests to bring about a world where we're all engaged and in this activity of constant movement. And yes, it makes sense to us because we're embedded inside of the thing itself. But when you talk about viscosity, I start thinking of music. I start thinking of cadences. Why do certain things get clogged up? Because it's also an opportunity for fraud too. When you get these inefficiencies in the system, it provides an incentive for somebody somewhere to take advantage of that inefficiency in the system. And they face a choice. It can either help or hinder. It can either be moved by fear, or they can be moved by, for want of a better word, love. I'm meaning that in a very sort of general way. There are two basic emotions, I think, that really move us, and one is fear and the other is love. And they either just want to help, or they want to hurt. And that's how I feel about the modern banking system. These people got cozy, and they seek to make profit from the inefficiencies, that music that I'm talking about, in our society. And I think they don't know how to ask for help. And one of the things that we have to be careful with frauds is that what they steal from us is actually our time. And what they punish is the hopeful. Because look at right now what's happening with Mt. Gox. Okay, you have a microcosm of a macrocosm. You've got a mirror image, a recursive image of what is going on out there in the world at large, happening within the Bitcoin sphere on a miniature scale, where we have a CEO that is prevaricating, that is, yes, he's using the truth to hurt people. Okay, because he hasn't lied. If you look at the press releases very carefully, they're very well worded. He is very careful not to lie. In doing so, what he does is he keeps you up all night waiting for the news, and he always releases it at the very, very last minute. There's little to no evidence that anyone else is working for this company other than this guy. And what he does is the victims in all of this, the customers, are clinging on to hope. They want to believe that everything's going to be okay, that they're going to get their money out. And ultimately, the theft is still happening. I don't know whether the coins are there. I don't know any more than anybody else. But in my opinion, the theft is taking place right beneath your eyes as you allow yourself to be concerned. What frauds take away our attention, that's what fuels them. They don't know how to ask for help. When they move, nothing comes of the movement. They are stuck in negative cycles of behavior that there is no hope for them. They have the desire. They don't have the hope to move out of it. And so maybe I'm just bringing into summary some of the thoughts that we've just said. But, and I say I do that because a lot of people ask the question, what's philosophy good for? And the thing is, you've got to know when to stop the thought. You've got to know when to say, okay, let's step back. And what does this mean? Well, what this means is that if you work in a bank or you work for a government organization, you need to start asking your boss hard questions. You need to start managing upwards. And if you don't like the answers that you get, if you feel like your time is being wasted, if you feel like the practical decisions that you are forced to make on a day-to-day basis are not helpful to society as a whole, to the world as a whole, to other people, you need to get up, turn around, and walk out the door. Preferably without any explanation whatsoever, because the more time you sit there, the more you're facilitating them. Right? You are actually fueling it. And what you're doing is you're punishing the innocent. Actually, Ayn Rand has a quote. I'm not a big fan of Ayn Rand, by the way, in case anyone wonders, but she did have a great quote where she said, when you pity the frauds, when you pity these people, what you end up doing is punishing the innocent. And what that does, that punishment of the innocent, it's all. Let me continue this thought. When you punish the innocent, you set about a condition that necessitates communication and collaboration. The reason at the moment that the elites, the world powers, the mega banks, the reason they're in control is because they can collaborate better than the people on the ground. Because the information in their systems travels much more efficiently. People understand each other because they're brought together by the greed motive. This constant need to hoard, this pathological desire to have more and more of something. I feel like we need to stop being the banks and just start looking at ourselves and our role in it. What can I do now? Never mind what has happened. There'll be plenty of time later once we set about a new paradigm to look back, and historians can go through the correspondence and work out who did what and when. But for now, the only question that really matters is what you're going to do about it. And that's what I think that we can take away from these observations.
CryptoKit is the world's first Chrome browser Bitcoin wallet. It's the easiest, fastest Bitcoin wallet payment system. With a simple one-click install, it takes just seconds to get your wallet set up. And because CryptoKit finds the address and payment for you, there's no more fussing around or tab switching. CryptoKit is more than just a wallet. It comes with a preloaded PGP encrypted social network, news feeds from Reddit and Google, and up-to-date charts from exchanges. Finally, CryptoKit Directory allows you to make two-click payments with any of the BitPay merchants. Once you install CryptoKit, you won't need anything else. For more information or to download CryptoKit, visit CryptoKit.com.
The BitGive Foundation is a non-profit charitable giving organization leveraging the power of the Bitcoin community to improve public health and the environment worldwide. Help us demonstrate the significant impact of Bitcoin in addressing these critical issues on a global scale. Support international giving in Bitcoin. Please visit our website at www.bitgivefoundation.org. That's www.bitgivefoundation.org.
It's hard to see the truth of your actions when your salary depends on not seeing them, and when the consequences of those actions are so far removed from the moment of decision. And I've been there, and it's not an easy place to be, because it doesn't happen suddenly. It happens very, very slowly. You start off working in an environment that you find hopeful and positive. And then gradually the priorities shift from behind you, or gradually you become more and more aware of the practical and the real versus the story and the myth or the promise. And then as you do so, the cognitive dissonance increases, and it manifests. It manifests with sadness. It manifests with depression. It manifests with anxiety. And it can
substance abuse as well, I think, as well. You can add to
and
that.
then at some point, sure, absolutely. Escapism, all forms of escapism, whether through substances, through trying not to think, through sports, through TV, through whatever. And then at some point, the cognitive dissonance becomes either overwhelming, or you find a way to maintain permanent escape by numbing yourself to everything. I don't think that's sustainable.
It's hard work being in denial, though. Is that what you're saying? Because
it's very hard work. Yeah, it's very hard work to operate in an environment that, at some level, is in complete contradiction with your principles, where your idea of yourself as a good person is being challenged every single day by the glimpses you get of the consequences of your actions, until one day you can't sustain it anymore. In my case, I had a brilliant moment where I was asked to censor my public speech in order to get a contract. And at that moment, it all kind of crystallized, and I realized that through repeated compromises, I had found myself feeding the very beast that I, couldn't support in principle. And I had to do a dramatic change in my priorities and my actions. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult even for people who are aware. And most people really, have other things to do than think about these things. They have practical matters.
Well, they think they do.
Soccer practice well, they think they do. Yes. It's very easy to get distracted by the minutiae of life on a daily basis and not pay attention to where you're going, and then look up and 10 years have passed.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, I wanted to say that really that denial isn't ignorance. It's knowing what the truth is and actively choosing not to see it. And you're absolutely right that we are almost numbed, particularly by some of the sort of major economic calamities of late. Like, birth begins with negation. It begins with a prosecution of the past and a hope of what could be, of what could come out of it. A hope past will be remembered differently, I think. The past hasn't finished happening, in a sense. We always have time to recontextualize and re-understand it in new ways. And it wasn't even that new. I mean, maybe we should just go over a little bit about what this fundamentally is. It is a global dialogue with a memory. It is a global self-stabilizing consensus. And it's backed ultimately, if you're looking for any kind of backing or intrinsic value, if you must, it's backed against the best understanding we have of the laws of physics. Because we wouldn't have computers at all if it weren't for the quantum revolution around the 1920s. And that is, physics is about asking questions about strange phenomena in our world. It's about building patterns that allow us to be able to circumnavigate our world without falling over, without becoming disorientated, because it builds rules. It says, right, I can make a prediction that is deterministic, that if I put this input in, I'm going to get this output. Then, of course, we have to move up to the software layer. The software layer has to touch down at the physics at some point. And then you have to come up with some if statements. You have to come up with some conditions. You need to say if this and this. And that's what we were just saying, I think, when we talked about the viscosity of money, a flow of capital, because it's not just money, it's also capital, and the flow of things in our world. And at some point, this has to meet, I think, where a lot of people searching for intrinsic value get stuck is they fail to see, or they don't get as far as page 3 of the Bitcoin paper for a start, which is where the magic starts. This is where he talks the application of, I don't have it in front of me, actually, I didn't come that well prepared, but he starts to talk about the application of proof of work. And he brings together the physics and the mind. He brings together the needs of the mind, this need for, possibilities in the future, this need for freedom. I don't mean more freedom, more emancipation, like just freedom of movement type freedom. And he does that by suggesting the idea, and he's quite tentative about it. Satoshi Nakamoto is quite tentative. He doesn't want to say for sure that rewarding somebody with a token on top of the network called a Bitcoin will ensure the actors will behave in an honest way, because you can either defraud the network or you can behave honestly and just apply more processing power to support the robustness of the network in exchange for the reward than it would be for you to, for example, tell your own story on the network, for you to 51% or compromise it in another way. He's not entirely sure. If you look at the language very closely, he says it ought to. He's quite equivocal. He wants to leave himself some room later on. Maybe we shouldn't take the hash rate for granted. But for now, this is a good enough model. And what this is truth is repetition, or at least truth is as good as you're going to get. It's repetition. And
so let's talk a bit about the truth behind this, because that's another, I think, very interesting thing about Bitcoin. When you first look at Bitcoin, it's a currency, it's money, it's digital money. That really misses the point. Then you've got a network and an implementation, which is essentially a piece of software. And behind that, you've got a community of people. But underlying all of this is the blockchain technology. And as a technology, it's more useful, I think, to think of the blockchain as a design pattern. It's a new design pattern for distributed systems. It's a design pattern that takes the traditional model of concentric circles around a root of trust and authority with increasing access control as you go out, and moats or walls set around a central authority, and it inverts it completely. And it actually makes the authority reside at the edges of the network through this process of collaboration. And it makes that authority cumulative, so that the more people participate, authority is achieved at ever higher rates with every passing block, with every increase in the hashing power, with every increase in the constituency of users. Network effect creates authority and trust in a highly diffuse and distributed manner, which also makes it very difficult to exploit, because there's no single thing that you can take down. And this narrative is very difficult for people to understand, primarily because authority has never been diffuse. Authority has always been centralized in most systems. It is a model that's worked very well, but is a model rooted in physical power and force. And it is the outcome of the centralization of physical power. In decentralized systems like Bitcoin, you invert that trust model, and where previously you had to trust everyone who had access, and therefore very few people could have access. In a decentralized system, you trust no one. You trust the design pattern. You trust the math. You trust the self-adapting system to reach equilibrium states in which reward for consensus is greater than reward for fraud. And in that equilibrium, the system is not only self-sustaining, but it's also completely open. You don't need access control. You don't need secrecy. You don't need vetting. When you trust no one but the design pattern, you can allow everyone to access. And so it completely inverts the trust model, and it creates this new environment where, through this diffuse authority, you can establish trust across massive scale with massive participation. But here's the problem. You can't explain that. It's very difficult to explain that narrative, because people intrinsically or intuitively associate authority with centralization, because that's the only authority model they've ever seen. So when you say, well, Bitcoin has no center, and people will ask, well, okay, yes, I understand how it has no center, but who runs it? It doesn't have a center. Yes, okay, but who controls it? Well, it isn't controlled by anyone. It's really a collaborative function. Okay, but could someone take over the controls? Well, there are no controls to take over. There is no center or any levers of power at the center that someone could take over. And so you go into this circular discussion where people are grasping for the central authority, whether that's a system that's running it, a lever of power that can be pulled by someone, or even an authority figure who is Satoshi. And what do you mean it doesn't matter who Satoshi is? Of course it matters. What are the motivations of the creator of this thing? And that's a very interesting question, because that is a question born of a centralized authority model. Because when authority is derived by the creator of the system, when authority is derived by who issued the currency, not who uses it, then the motives of the issuer matter, because the issuer still has their hand on the levers of control. The motives of the issuer matter very much. The trustworthiness of the issuer matters because they can exert control into the future of that system. And every centralized authority system we've known requires us to trust a certain authority. The root of trust is sitting at the center. And so with Bitcoin, you pull back the curtain.
Well, the question, it doesn't make sense to ask, who is in charge, because everyone's a master node.
But that's an unsatisfactory answer, because the context in which the question is asked is so steeped in certain assumptions about how authority and trust works, because the only two models we've seen so far are either authority vested in a single individual or authority vested in a hierarchical organization designed to distribute that authority through checks and balances implemented through process. So we use organizational and process tools to control authority, to diffuse it, whether that's the US Constitution creating a three-tier government or a three-part government with checks and balances, whether it's a corporate governance board where a board of directors vies for power against the chief executive officer to create balance, essentially to unvest the individual and instead to vest the process with a higher level of trust, because the process is not as easily corruptible. And then we've taken this a step further. Now we're vesting authority in the design pattern, and we're diffusing the authority completely until there is no center, not even an organization. And that's a very difficult leap for people to make. It's just as difficult as it was in the Middle Ages for people to think, well, if we get free, if we give up on the king, if we take away royalty, how do we make decisions? How can we possibly make decisions if every peasant has an opinion? How can we possibly create society at scale without a king? And it was very difficult for people to understand that, democracy wasn't just hampered because the king didn't want it. It was also primarily hampered because the peasant themselves weren't, like, hey, this idea sounds pretty weird to me. At least that guy up there in the castle, I know who he is. I know where he lives. If he gets too out of control, we might actually have one of his relatives kill him and take over, as usually happens. But this idea of diffuse authority given to the people sounds pretty strange and radical. There was as much resistance.
Well, look at what democracy is. So essentially, democracy means people and power together. It's a very, very costly model to implement. And it came about, it was an innovation of Cleisthenes, an ancient Greek ruler, or at least he was the guy that put in the reforms, and that he's the one that gets the credit. But he did it in response to the mob. This isn't a government formed in a classroom out of theory. This is out of necessity. And what it did is it gave the people of Athens, ancient Athens, a sense of autonomy and a sense of self-directedness in a way that, we look back at now and just go in awe. I mean, it's one of the most successful civilizations in the human story. And it's remarkable that it got lost as a system of governance for so long. And now we're getting back. But this is all to do with the relationship between the sophos and the demos, the experts and people. When I have some information that you don't have that you need, I am encumbered. I have a responsibility. Do I use it for my own private ends, or do I use it to help you? It's a choice that I have to make. It's not, I don't have a choice about the choice, if you like. And even if I choose to act dishonestly, I've still got to live with that truth myself later on. And I don't think that we can always get away. This is something that comes up in Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. When we commit our crimes, we pay for them twice, once in the punishment that society gives us, and again, of course, myself, that I punish myself for the things that I've done wrong. I think we need to just be a little bit careful that we don't talk about this centralization, decentralization continuum into a moral issue. What was morally reprehensible at the banks was not how they organized themselves per se. It was the actions of the individuals themselves. And in fact, because like I say, democracy is an expensive system to implement. It's very costly. So mostly it's subject to the availability of resources, whether you can be fully decentralized. But actually, I think it speaks to, who are the good bankers? Who are the people who
It's a matter of scale, Chris. I mean, I think that's the bottom line, in that, if we look at banks today and what they're doing is they're failing to scale trust, because they are vulnerable to large systemic effects. But that is something that happened over time. If you go back to the 16th century, when you see the first commercial institutions evolve from out of the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company and all of the expeditions that were happening, and the creation of the modern corporation, the creation of a modern open banking system, the creation of the modern stock markets, and the ability for individuals to invest in corporations, which up to then were royal charters. The investors were the aristocracy, and only the aristocracy. And it wasn't because of a lack of money. It was about, the scale, the ability to scale these institutions. So if you look at banks then, they took something that was only the purview of kings, and they gave it to, let's say today, 1 billion, maybe 2 billion people have the economic tools that only kings had in the 16th century. So banking was a huge equalizer. It was a system of equalization and meritocracy. The modern currencies, the same thing. The modern corporation, the same thing. All of these were systems that flattened power, that took it out of a pyramid structure and squashed it. But what happens over time? As the base of this system gets wider and wider and wider, it starts looking like a pyramid again. It fails to scale. And what we've seen now is really the egalitarian moves of these systems, or the egalitarian impact of these systems gradually diminishing over time until it starts operating contrary to egalitarian principles and starts reconcentrating power. And that's really a failure to scale the system. It's a failure to make the pyramid flat, so it starts getting pointier and pointier. What Bitcoin does is it simply unlocks the next level of scale. It's like achievement unlocked. You manage to go from the 1,000 kings to the 1 billion peasants level of economic scale. Cryptocurrencies will take us from the 1 billion peasants to the 7 billion human level of scale, because we can scale them better. And at some point, they're also going to fail to scale. And we're going to need to disrupt that pyramid too. I mean, that is the endless cycle of change. That is the entropic nature of the universe. The things that start off as great egalitarian forces end up becoming power systems. That's
great. That's a wonderful exegesis there. And I would say, yes, it's about understanding the small in relation to the big. This is about bringing together the public and the private interests. So you have the local private interests of my desire to make money. Then you have the public interest, which needs stability. It needs consensus. It needs a form of agreement. And that's what the blockchain network does. That's for me, that's what I find important about it. And that's why I think it has intrinsic value. So you talked about scale, and maybe that should bring us on to the socioeconomic implications, particularly the sociology, because a trustless network doesn't rid us of the need for trust. On the contrary, it actually makes trust more important. And in particular, you should probably, and your listeners should probably look up at the idea of stranger interaction in sociology. And this is the chances that we take on each other before we know each other. Those kind of thin slice, if you also look, that's another key word, okay? We all walk around with a very, very thin slice of information about the world. And yet, I've still been here for more than 3 decades and I'm doing pretty well, even though I don't have very much information on what's going on. So this stranger interaction, it turns out that if you put up a sign in a street that says, we'll pay you $1 to talk to a complete stranger, people do it. And they don't even do it for the money. Money just says it's okay you to do this. You kind of want to do it, but it gives you an excuse. And so then so now we're at the sort of sociological layer. We can talk about the need for movement, the need for change, not just at the levels we've talked about already, but also that you might need to change the people that you hang out with. You might need to be able to, in order to create this new business that you've been dreaming of, you might need to meet somebody new that can add something to your life that hasn't happened before. And also the sociological layer, let's talk a little bit about mimetic desire. Like, I find Bitcoin valuable. I've spoken to hundreds, if not more than 1,000 people about Bitcoin this last year. From about February onwards, I got really immersed in it. It starts with intentions. They want to know why you're telling them about Bitcoin. Because if they're going to change everything, if they're going to suddenly, oh no, I have to think about my money now, I thought I could rely on that. They're going to want to know why, and they're going to want to know what's in it for you. If I agree with you that this should be valuable as well, if I align my interests with yours, what do you get out of it? And if you get something out of it, am I okay with that? And what do I get out of it? And what does everybody else get out of it? And you can't even, it's difficult, this issue of manipulation. And I mean like psychological manipulation. It's very difficult, I think, when people talk about Bitcoin to make it sound like this is good for everybody. And I think that has something to do with the deflationary economics that are built into it. A lot of people say, well, if it's deflationary, isn't everything going to get bunked up? And they don't understand that, surely we need more money. What they don't understand is the concept of infinity. They don't understand what the difference between infinity and eternity. Eternity is that which has no direction. It just is. It's as much inside as it is outside. It doesn't know boundaries. It doesn't have limits. But infinity can last forever, but it can also have a direction. So yes, you can take an ounce of silver and you can keep dividing it up into infinitely small pieces, so long as you can identify and discern every piece of silver that you're taking off. That's fine. And as long as each one is equal and fungible, that means they can be exchanged for the same amount. A Bitcoin is worth a Bitcoin always. It's okay. But you're still left with the finite ounce that you started. And that's the important takeaway, is that you get an infinity and you get value creation within the currency supply that's still tied to a finite whole. When you start printing more money, when you break that promise, the fixed issuance promise that you made at the door when people came in and you said there were only going to be 1 million coins or whatever your total supply is going to be, what you're doing is you're taking all the work that people did in the markets, all of the price discovery, all of the price comparison websites that you went to. That's work. It's minimal work, but it's work nonetheless. You are providing value. And then the central bank says, well, let's produce another silver coin. And now this is where the theft comes in. This is where the fraud is. Because now what you're doing is you're taking all the work that the people did on the ground out there in the world, price discovery, and then you're choosing to give this new ounce to who exactly? To your friends, presumably, right? You're going to give it to the banksters. You're going to give it to your friends in government. You're going to give it to, it's nepotism. You're going to give it to the people that are closest to you. And as a result, they're going to, for a short time, enjoy some of the benefits of this new ounce of silver, because for a while, it will still have the properties of the value that was generated in the first ounce. But over time, people start to realize, actually, this money is a little bit more abundant than I thought it was. And anyway, it's not the money I want. It's what it buys me. Money doesn't want to get too valuable, because then you want it too much. It can't lose its value too quickly either, because, then people start misallocating their money. They start putting it into things they don't really need, just in order to preserve the capital. And so this fraud is very subtle. We talked about the Republic, didn't we? In the Republic, I think Plato brings up this commonality between rhetoric and relativism. what I find when I go out and I try to talk to people about Bitcoin, I usually start it from the issues that affect them the most. So if I'm talking to a bar or something, I'll bring up notion of fees on the Visa network and the chargebacks and all of that kind of thing. And what you tend to find is that they'll say, oh, well, it's all, what you believe and what I believe, it's all relative, isn't it? So you could just use clever language. This is the rhetorician. You could use just clever language and you could just blindside me. So yes, I hear what you're saying and that sort of makes sense to me in a logical way. I don't know whether you're too clever. I don't know whether there's something that you have that I don't have. So the way I find is best, just bringing this back now to where this theme started with mimetic desire, trying to get other people to want something because you believe that it's good. I think what you have to do is be very patient. If it's obvious that this person doesn't, it just doesn't have the time right now, they've got a lot going on in their lives, I think the appropriate thing for you to say, okay, I really thank you for giving me your time. If you've got any questions, here's my email address, and just, write your email address on or something. But if you find that they're interested in this, what I would do is I would start with Bitcoin. And if they are interested in it, you can then move into, the wider ecosystem, the altcoins. You can talk about all the businesses that are growing out of this, the business opportunities that are emerging. And then I think you make your way in. So yeah, it starts with their problem first. And then it's about being patient, make sure you don't make them feel silly. Sometimes people don't like it when, somebody knows something that they don't because they perhaps like to feel like they're very clever. So be sensitive to that, particularly if you're going to get into the technical stuff. I wouldn't talk about mining as a rule, certainly not on your first go. That's very sort of pro. That's quite high end. You want to leave that until a little bit later. And so then we've gone from the physics to sociology. And this whole thing hangs together with those wonderful adjectives we call numbers, those things that are universal, that understood the world over, no matter what culture you're from, no matter what language you speak, everybody understands the concept of 1, 2. Everybody knows how to describe the quantities in their world, the sequences in their world. And that's what, for me, makes this really powerful.
Well, that's the essence of a design pattern, really. Money is a language and value is a symbolic and abstract thing that we assign to things using the language of money. It's a shared cultural system. It doesn't have existence outside of human culture. Mm-hmm. And money isn't something that you see outside of human culture because it is human culture. And it doesn't have value outside of human culture because, again, it's just an artifact of human symbology. But within that system, we create the stories that allow us to understand money and to use that conversation, to use the language of money, essentially to create more efficient ways of interacting with each other. If we didn't speak the same language, we can still communicate through pantomime and mimetics and hand gestures based on our shared values. I can explain food to any human in the world by making a few hand gestures because we have the same shared cultural understanding of food, which is a biological understanding. And explaining money is harder, but at the same time, it is a shared language because it allows us to interact with people in a much more efficient way than trying to transact with physical things that are not abstract. And so it's hard to explain money. It's hard to think about money. But in the end, it's something we do all the time. In some ways, money is one of the oldest inventions of humanity. Its history goes back hundreds of thousands of years. It's as basic as fire and language, and probably started appearing soon after fire and language. Basic tool making leads to the creation of forms of intrinsic value and then symbols that represent that. So, this is a very ancient conversation. And part of the difficulty here is that people in the present are not aware of the fact that this is a conversation that's been happening for hundreds of thousands of years. And that a lot of the things we take for granted are more a reflection of the medium we use to speak the language, quirks of the language, colloquialisms. We use colloquialisms of paper money. We use speech patterns and habits and little expressions that really speak to our common understanding of paper money and increasingly of credit cards. And they color our understanding of money because we have these little quirks of language. And that's why it's important to have this discussion. I grew up bilingual. And one of the things that I realized very early on is that having two languages to draw from very quickly gives you the ability to start comparing. And comparative linguistics opens a whole window of understanding, because suddenly you realize the difference between things that are intrinsic to the language and things that are part of what you're trying to express with the language, and how different languages handle these little quirks. Well, now everyone is offered the opportunity to be fluent in multiple currencies, and multiple currencies not based on the same model, but multiple currencies that derive from completely different models. Just like speaking Mandarin and English gives you one of the deepest levels of comparative linguistics, because you have some of the fundamental constructs in the language completely conceived differently. Cryptocurrencies and fiat give us a very, very deep comparative numismatics. It gives us the ability to talk about money in a new and interesting way, because for the first time we can compare two radically different concepts of currency. And that doesn't just teach us about cryptocurrencies. I think more importantly, it's teaching people about currency in general and helping them understand the money they already have,
right. And so now,
better than they did before.
Okay.
That's the new conversation and the narrative we're having.
Like, well, the question of, okay, now what? Like you say, to continue on from where you're saying, that this is about value created around lines of trust and culture, and not around national borders anymore. And I think what the point is justice. And I think that this technology can help them get that, because you've got a monetary system where the regulation is baked in by design. Ethics are baked into the code. You don't have to have a police officer to go around enforcing the double spends. Everyone's a police officer, because everybody is, downloading the wallet software. Every wallet software is a master node. It will trace every transaction, and it will verify the validity of the blockchain, of the public ledger. All of the claims, all of the economic claims that have been made on the network will be verified independently by each node.
Right, exactly. So it's ironic, because people say Bitcoin is unregulated, whereas in fact Bitcoin is regulated. It's regulated by convention. It's regulated by algorithm. It's regulated by a shared understanding of the protocol. And that means it's regulated by every one of us. Where it takes away counterparty risk mandated from the outside, it gives us the opportunity to add the counterparties of our choice with things like multisig. It challenges our very notions of where the source of authority is and how to conduct ourselves in a system where deterministic resolution of transactions is possible based on this shared consensus, where you not only know what's happening on the Bitcoin network through the examination of the blockchain. Each individual client can independently verify each transaction without external recourse, simply by looking at the proof of work that is embedded in the blockchain. But not only do you know what is happening on the Bitcoin network, you also know that everybody else knows what is happening on the Bitcoin network. And you also know that everybody else knows that everybody else knows what is happening on the network. So it's not just that you're applying the convention to arrive at a conclusion or to derive some knowledge. you know that everyone else is applying the same convention, and therefore you can predict that they will arrive at the same conclusion. And finally, you know that everybody understands that this convention is broadly shared, and therefore everyone can predict that the entire network will arrive at the same conclusion through this process of consensus. And that's kind of a very beautiful thing. It's a very elegant thing because it is the ultimate kind of extension of knowledge. It's not something I know. It's something I know that you know it, and you know that I know that you know it. And it sounds like a rabbit hole, but in fact, it's a very important principle of knowledge, which is that shared understanding, that shared consensus, which allows us to make deterministic predictions about what will happen on the blockchain. If I look at a transaction, I can tell you whether that transaction will be verified because I know that everyone will use the same approach to decide that question. And that is extremely powerful because it means that you no longer have to rely on trust outside of your own understanding of the system. And it will be a very powerful form of justice because that shared understanding cannot easily be violated or confused or cheated by anyone acting against the common consensus. When everyone is marching to the same beat, that 10-minute pulse of block confirmation through increased proof of work, it's very easy to notice the one actor that's trying to march against the beat. It's very difficult to march against that beat. So, yeah, this is a new narrative, and it's one that will take some time to understand. The ones who are most steeped in the old narrative are the ones who are going to have the greatest difficulty adapting to this. And this is the same for bankers as it's been for scientists and any other profession. You tend to use the existing paradigm
if you're not,
form your worldview.
Well, if you're not willing to give up the need to be right,
it's very difficult. No, I wouldn't either. I think there's an interesting realization. The interesting realization is that bankers themselves as individuals are, for the most part, nice people. And for the most part, they're doing a good job and they're living in a system where they feel that they're getting properly rewarded for delivering the centralized trust that people need. And in that respect, they're doing good. It is only as a system, as a whole, where the systemic compromise at every level and the opportunities for corruption mean that as a whole, the system doesn't do good. But most individuals in the system are really just, moving with the flow. But the nice news is that with this new system, because it's completely external to the traditional banking system, we don't need their permission. And just like many decentralization movements in the past, the people in the center are least likely to give you permission to decentralize them out of a job. But as in many cases, they have no control over it. The most disruptive movements are the ones that remove control over the future of the disruption from the people who are most likely to be disrupted. And Bitcoin doesn't need anybody's permission. Cryptocurrencies as a design pattern can be adopted on an individual by individual basis until the reality of it is simply momentous and mountainous and insurmountable.
Yeah, that bang on. Everything you said is absolutely on the button. I would say that actually that the blockchain tells two stories. It tells a story to us in the present about the transfer of value, but it also tells a story to the future. You've got to think about this as a permanent ledger, a permanent record, and the history is going to look back at the things that you did. And it's going to be very, very difficult to separate your identity from your actions on the blockchain over time. You can do it very weakly, like you've spoken about before, weak pseudonymity. Yes, you do get some anonymity. And of course, with anonymity comes authenticity. You're able to explore new ways of being, new sides to yourself that perhaps the society you've embedded in didn't let you. But over time, that anonymity is going to look very, very temporary. And I think we all need to think about the way, what history are we leaving behind? What are we going to leave behind for the people that come later?
Yeah, there's the adage is that once something is on the internet, it's on the internet forever. just got amplified massively with the blockchain.
It mattered to you. These are economic claims that you're making. If you don't have money, you don't have a voice, and this is the thing. And so, whatever you're doing with your money is going to speak even more about the kind of person that you are.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation about the nature of money, the nature of reality, philosophy as it applies to Bitcoin, intrinsic value, the future of justice and decentralized systems. As always, a great pleasure.
It's been an absolute privilege.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for listening to episode 101 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for this episode was provided by Andreas M. Antonopoulos and Chris Ellis. Music for this episode was provided by Jared Rubens and General Fuzz. Any questions or comments? Email Adam at letstalkbitcoin.com. Have a good one.